Everyone, yeah, my name is Charles Anderson, and I'm a marine biologist. I'm based in the Maldives. I've been there for just over 30 years now, and for the last 25 years or so I've been studying fishes, fisheries, sharks, mantas, but for the last 25 years or so I've specialised at least more than half my time on whales and dolphins. And during that time I've been very fortunate to come across quite a few Actually, before we go any further, I don't think you quite got it. You have to start now, and you have to do the one at the top. Don't forget that. And during the course of the time, I've been very fortunate to be able to see and study beaked whales. And there's the whales and dolphins, the group of Cetacea. There's getting towards 100 species. New ones are being discovered, and roughly a quarter are beaked whales, a separate little family called the Ziphidae. And they look, here's one, this is Cuvier's beaked whale, it's a juvenile Cuvier's beaked whale which came up around our boat in the Maldives. They look rather like overgrown bottlenose dolphins. Currently there's 22 species. There are variations, of course, but they all have a rather similar habitat, a rather similar lifestyle, which I'll talk about, so they all look rather similar. And yes, they look like overgrown bottlenose dolphins, about 15, 20 foot long, 25 foot long maybe, so 5, 6, 7 meters would be a typical size for the different species. And as I said, this is Cuvier's beaked whale. They dive very deep. They go after squid, most of them, and to feed on squid, slippery things. You'd think you need lots of teeth to get a good grip, but you don't for some reason. These whales are able to get up close to them. They dive deep, hundreds of meters down. They echolocate. They find the squid. They get up close and they slurp it in. And for that, you don't really need teeth. So typically, they only have a couple of teeth left. This, as I said, is Cuvier's, and I'm going to talk about a couple of other rarer ones. But first of all, I should thank you all for being here because, as you'll know, in the other hall, the star attraction Monty Hall and Gordon Buchanan, two alpha males, difficult to compete, ex-Royal Marine, hunky guys. So here you are, just a bit of gratuitous flesh for you. But there is a serious point because here again is a hunky male. A bit of gratuitous beaked whale flesh. This is a dense-beaked or Blainville's beaked whale. And in the males, in many of the species, the males, as mentioned, they have maybe only 2 teeth left. In the males, these get very large and they erupt out as tusks. And the males fight each other. And they joust, they come head-to-head and they whack each other with their tusks. So they end up with these great gouges down their backs. It's really quite distinctive. That's a feature of the beaked whales. I'll just put the name up. I want to mention the scientific name. This is quite a widespread, well-known species. It's the dense-beaked or Blainville's beaked whale. The Latin name is Optodon densirostris, dense rostrum. Okay, it's got a very heavy beak. The very first one that was discovered, the first skull that was discovered, it was so heavy that the scientists who described it thought it was a fossil, thought it had been mineralized, thought it was rock. But actually, in the beak, they have very, very dense bone. It's the densest tissue produced by any vertebrate, and they use this to add a bit of weight to their whacking of each other. The first part of the scientific name, mesoplodon, a bit of a mouthful, but you can break it down into 3 parts: mes, or meso, oplo, and don. To start with the meso, that means the middle, Mesoamerica, Central America. At the end you've got the don, orthodontist, dentist, teeth, and the bit in the middle, oplo, is actually from ancient Greek. Hoplite was a Greek soldier, a carrier of arms, an arms carrier, weapon carrier. So these are the animals that carry a tooth as a weapon in the middle of their teeth, in the middle of the jaw. So he has 2 teeth sticking up in his lower jaw, and these are what he uses as tusks. The shape and position of the teeth is different for each species, so you can use this for identification. I'm very fortunate to be based in the Maldives. Here's my wife, here's home. Just come back to sunny Brighton for a week. But this is the Maldives, and one of the features of the Maldives, it's a fantastic place to be. It's a fantastic place also for whales and dolphins, and particularly as it turns out, for beaked whales, because the Maldives, here we are. The Maldives are a string of coral reefs with islands on top in the Indian Ocean, southwest of India, and they come straight out of the deep ocean. And beaked whales like feeding on slopes, where it goes down steeply into the deep ocean. That's where you get productivity, tides mixing things up, get a lot of squid, so that's where the beaked whales live. And in Britain, if you want to see beaked whales, you have to go 100 miles off the western approaches to the edge of the continental shelf. If you're off the west coast of India there, you have to go 100, or in the north 200 miles offshore to get to that steep slope. But in the Maldives, you've just got to go out your front door, basically. I have an apartment in Mali, the capital, and a mile offshore, it's over 1,000 feet deep. It just drops straight away. So this is perfect beaked whale habitat, so a fantastic place to be. As I said, in Britain, you've really got to go a long way off, unless an accidental one gets lost. The Thames whale, from a few years ago, the whale that swam up the Thames was a beaked whale. It was a type of beaked whale known as the northern bottlenose whale. It gets to about 8 or more meters long, 25 foot long. There's one in the North Atlantic, that's the northern bottlenose. There's one in the Southern Ocean, the southern bottlenose. And there's a tropical one, the tropical bottlenose. The tropical bottlenose, people don't actually, or didn't actually know what it was, and that's what I'm going to come on to. When I first went to Maldives and started studying the whales and dolphins, I got interested in all of the dolphins and the whales, but beaked whales had a particular fascination, and one especially caught my imagination, because the guidebook I had at the time, from the 1980s, it had a double-page spread on Longman's beaked whale. Longman's beaked whale. And it was illustrated with a dotted outline. Nobody knew what it looked like. And it had been discovered in Australia, actually on the Pacific coast, near the Great Barrier Reef, the other coast of Australia behind me here. An animal had washed up, a dead animal had washed up in the 1880s. The skull had been collected and taken to the State Museum in Brisbane. And it sat there for 40 years until the 1920s, when the curator, a fellow by the name of Longman, Herbert Longman, got it out and realised, it was a big thing, he realised this was a new species of beaked whale. It was a beaked whale skull, but different from anybody else's. A new species, so he named it. He named it Mesoplodon, that name again, Pacificus, the Mesoplodon on the Pacific coast of Australia. And that was it. All we knew, there was a big beaked whale out there somewhere. And then 30 years later, in the mid-50s, another one was found, another skeleton was found in Somalia. Actually in a fish meal factory. It had washed up on the beach and the fishermen had taken to the factory to be minced up for fish meal, chicken feed and what have you. But the skull had been preserved, and that ended up in a museum in Florence, in Italy. And so we knew that it occurred in Somalia and Australia. And if you draw a line in between the two, it passes pretty close to the Maldives. So I had in my mind always that maybe, could it possibly be, one day, one of these might turn up. And the years went by, as they do, until the year 2000. By this time I'd been in the Maldives 17 years, and early 2000 I got a phone call from a colleague, a girl by the name of Zaha Wahid, who works at the Marine Research Centre in Maldives, saying there was a whale washed up, a 25-foot whale washed up. This is quite interesting, but nothing too special, because we get a lot of sperm whales, so they're 25, 30 foot. So I asked for more information. She called back the next day and said, don't worry, my mistake, not a whale at all, it's a 20-foot long bottlenose dolphin. Aha! Very excited. So with a colleague, I jumped on a boat and I went down there to a couple of atolls south. And this is the island, Keadu, and there was a stinky carcass floating in the lagoon. The fishermen had towed it to their island. They want to get the blubber for oil. They don't kill them, but dead ones, they get the blubber for the oil, for their boats. And I went down with my junior colleague, Ibrahim Naim, and he's the junior guy, so he was volunteered to get in the water next to this stinky thing, and take a small skin sample for DNA, which we sent off. He's actually a very senior guy now. He's the head of the Environmental Protection Agency for the Maldives. We paid the fishermen. It's tradition, fishermen have the right to the whale if they find one. So we paid them for the carcass, and we asked them to bury it, and we dug it up 6 months later. We came back 6 months later, and the island office, there's a government office, and they put a sign saying basically don't park your boat here. They pull the boats up on the beach. And the Marine Research Centre has a whale buried here. Don't park here. We came and dug it up 6 months later. Here's the crew helping us, and they got it all out. It was all nicely in order. There's all the vertebrae, the backbones, and the complete skeleton is now in the National Museum in Mali. If you go to the Maldives, if you go to Mali, you can see the skeleton is there. And once we got the skull, we knew what it was, because the skulls, the bone, the configuration of the bone is slightly different. Longman's beaked whale. This was the first complete specimen of Longman's beaked whale. And the lower jaw in particular, I mentioned the teeth. Longman's has two small teeth at the tip of the lower jaw. And at the time, these were the only 2 teeth in human hands. There's another one washed up in Japan since then. So fantastic. In fact, I've jumped ahead slightly. We knew already because we'd sent the skin sample away to a geneticist in Australia, a lady called Dr. Mel Dalebud, and she studies the genetics of beaked whales, very specialised. And she came back and she'd taken a small sample from the Brisbane skull and a small sample from the Somali skull in Italy, and got DNA from those, and ours matched. So we knew it was Longman's beaked whale, the first complete specimen. But it was a manky thing. It had been baked in the sun, it had been drifting. We didn't really know what it looked like still, so we still had the dotted outline. However, Meryl, in her travels, had been visiting different museums, looking at specimens of beaked whales. And in South Africa, she found a specimen, just a couple of bones, labelled southern bottlenose whale. Like the Thames whale, northern bottlenose is the Southern Ocean one. She took a little sample, bone, took it back to a lab, analysed it, and it wasn't southern bottlenose whale. There'd been a mistake. It was Longman's beaked whale. And in fact, this whale washed up in the 60s. A very senior cetacean biologist has got his hands on the fresh specimen. He put it in his freezer, chopped it up, put it in his freezer, gone on his annual leave, come back, the freezer had failed. Terrible stink, the staff had chucked everything out. Only salvaged a couple of bones which were in the museum, which was enough to get the DNA. But fortunately, when it was fresh, it died on the beach. It was a fresh specimen. It died on the beach. Fantastic photos, so we know what it looks like. And it looks like a bottlenose whale. It doesn't look like a typical Mesopteron at all. Just a few weeks later, after this, I was out at sea with a group, and we were looking at, they'd come specifically, I run whale watching trips in the Maldives, they come specifically to look at dolphins. We were looking at some bottlenose dolphins, and I saw splashing over there, looking with binoculars. Could it be Longman's beaked whale? 20, 25 of them. They were having their annual orgy or something. I don't know what was going on. So I turned the boat and I went over there, and the group I had with me said, well, you know, why are we leaving these dolphins? I said, well, look, there's Longman's beaked whale under there. But we've come to look at dolphins. I said, but these are Longman's beaked whale. But these are dolphins. Anyway, we had a little argument, which I won, and we went over there, and when people realised what it was, they also got very excited about it, and fantastic. And it was a bit of an overcast day, a bit of a grey day, but there they were. There was a group of 20 or 25 Longman's beaked whales having their annual general meeting or something, all cavorting at the surface. Fantastic. And they have a very bulbous head, a beak, and a very distinctive pattern to the pale melon, the pale head with a dark bar just near the blowhole. And we have this from the photos from South Africa, the fresh dead specimen. So fantastic. We now know there have been other sightings of this tropical bottlenose whale, as it was also known, Longman's beaked whale. There were specimens from Somalia, Kenya, South Africa, Maldives, into the Pacific, and now all the way up to the Americas. So we compiled all this information and published it as a scientific paper in 2003. So just 12 years ago. This is an animal that's the size of a small elephant. It's ranged from East Africa to the Americas, right across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, 2/3 of the way around the globe. It's not rare. It's the size of an elephant, and we did not know until 12 years ago what it even looked like. It's quite extraordinary how little we know about the sea. And to give you an example, here's another thing we didn't know. Fast forward 10 years, 2013, I'm in Mali, I've got a little bicycle, I'm going to the shops, do my shopping, bag of groceries, coming home, there's lots of little tourist shops, postcards, t-shirts, knickknacks, and in the window of one is a vertebra, a single backbone. Not this one as it happens, but one very similar. So it's about this size. It's not a dolphin or a sheep. It's not a whale, a big whale. It's a medium-sized whale, perhaps a beaked whale. Maybe a pilot whale, I don't know. Perhaps a beaked whale. So I go into the shop and I ask, there's 2 girls there, I ask them, you know, about this thing in the window. They haven't got a clue, but they give me the telephone number of the owner. So I give the owner a call. He doesn't know, but he puts me in touch with his assistant, a fellow called Arif, who does know. And I arranged to meet him at the shop, and he takes me through the bazaar, through the back streets, into this little dark alley, up some steps into a studio. And this guy, Arif, is an artist. Not a fine artist, he's a good artist. He does screen printing of t-shirts. So there's big trestle tables there with pots of paint and everything and half-finished t-shirts. And under one of the tables is a big cardboard box, like this, which he pulls out, and inside is the complete skeleton of a mature male beaked whale. Skull, tusks, everything. And so I photograph, I get it all out, and this is on the floor of the studio, some screen printing stuff over on the left. I photograph the skull, measure things, take a little sample of the DNA to send off to Merrill. And it looks like, this is the lower jaw, and he's got these two big teeth that stick out his tusks. It looks like a type of whale known as a ginkgo-toothed beaked whale. Very similar to a ginkgo-toothed beaked whale. And in the 50s, a beaked whale had washed up in Japan. And it had teeth rather like this. Teeth that look like the leaf of a ginkgo tree. Okay, where the stalk comes out is the sticky, uppy, sharp bit. This is a ginkgo tree. In Britain, it's an ornamental tree in parks and gardens. But in China and Japan, it's a native tree. And the Japanese scientists were familiar with the ginkgo tree. They thought the teeth reminded them of the leaf of the ginkgo. So they called it the ginkgo-toothed beaked whale. Mesopterodon again, ginkgo dens, ginkgo tooth. Mesopterodon, ginkgo dens. So to me, it looked not quite right, but pretty close to ginkgo-toothed beaked whale. So I sent off the photos and the little bone sample to Merrill, and the news came back. It's a new species of whale. It's not ginkgo-toothed. The genetics are different. It's a distinct species. It's very similar to ginkgo-toothed, but it's distinct. This is a new species of whale. Wow! Well, that doesn't happen every day, does it? However, the teeth, the ones on the top are the Mali specimen, the ones on the bottom are the original ginkgo tooth from Japan. So they're similar, but they're more squashed and elongated. The shape is different. And the genetics is different. But, in the 1960s, 1963, another one of these stinky dead whales washed up in Sri Lanka. And it was collected, it washed up on the beach just south of Colombo. It's about 15 foot long, and the guy in the suit is a very famous Sri Lankan biologist by the name of Deraniagala, a bit of a mouthful, Professor Paulus Edward Pires Deraniagala. There's a Sri Lankan in the audience, so I'll probably be corrected later. But he collected this specimen, and these days we've all got cell phones, we can take photos. This happened to be a passing tourist with a great big camera on a tripod, took a photo and later sent it to him sent a print from Germany. But he collected the skull, and it's in the museum. Whoops! It's in the museum in Colombo. So I went to have a look, measured it, because this might be ginkgo, or it might not be. He named it as a new species. Deraniagala was not aware of the ginkgo tooth, so he named this as a new species. He called it Mesopterodon hotaula, which is Sinhalese sharp-snapped, long-beaked. So it's the beaked whale. Not particularly helpful, but there you go. The skull's still there. I met the curator, she took a small sample of bone, sent it off to Merrill, and this actually is the new species of whale. So the new species of whale from the Maldives, and also they got a couple of specimens from the Pacific. These things always happen in 2s and 3s. It's not a new species. We've rediscovered Deraniagala's beaked whale. So if you go buy a new edition of a new guidebook, you'll have a new species of beaked whale. And this brings the total to 22 species of beaked whale currently known. If you look on the official IWC list, which is very recent, it was only published at the end of last year, it's still 21. They haven't got round to adding this one yet, but a new species. I'd very briefly mention that one of the specimens in the Pacific was discovered by an American biologist who'd been working with some fishermen in Kiribati, and as he was leaving, they gave him a feast, sitting under the palm trees, tucking in under the moonlight, tucking into his feast, chewing on this meat. A bit unusual. What is it? Our honoured guest, for you, we have brought whale meat. Boom. So he's a very polite fellow. He swallows it down, but he's a good biologist, and he asks, where did it come from? What is it? What species? They don't know. Somebody's brother's cousin bought it from another atoll. All the meat had been cooked. Couldn't get any DNA from that, but on the chopping board in the kitchen, where they chopped this meat up, he got a little scraping of the meat, put it in a vial, took it back to the States, analysed it, and he'd eaten an unknown species of whale. This turns out to be Deraniagala's beaked whale. So this one, as I said, this always happens in 2s and 3s. One washed up in Seychelles beginning of last year. This is Deraniagala's beaked whale from the DNA. You've got the external appearance in this one. Seychelles, Maldives, Sri Lanka, into the Pacific, into the Central Pacific. So halfway around the globe, this is an animal the size of a rhinoceros. And it was the paper describing it was published at the end of last year, just a few months ago. It's extraordinary. These are air-breathing animals. They have to come to the surface. They're big, and we don't even know they exist. So what else is out there? All sorts of things. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
I'm so disappointed that stopped. It was amazing. It could have gone on, except we've got this amazing speaker happening soon. But anybody, any quick questions for Charles? There's a lady here. I'm just going to come to you with a microphone. You need to speak loudly.
How long are they staying at the surface, roughly, when you see them?
Thank you. The question was how long do they stay at the surface? And the quick answer is not long enough. So when I have trips out looking for whales and dolphins, we normally see them in the distance. They roll in a quite distinctive way. And they come to the surface, they breathe 5 or 6 times, which takes 1 or 2 minutes, and then they're gone. And we wait anything from, we regularly wait 30 minutes, and they don't often come up. We can wait an hour. Sometimes we're lucky, sometimes we're not. So typically between 30 minutes and an hour, sometimes very much longer.
I'm coming to this gentleman here.
Do I infer from what you were saying with that gang that you were dolphin watching?
Yes.
And then you saw a gang of them
Yep.
along the way. Was that therefore the first sighting of live ones?
No, is the short answer. It's my first sighting, so I was very excited about it. But if you remember, I mentioned at the start about the London whale, the Thames whale, it's the northern bottlenose whale. There had been sightings of a bottlenose whale that looked a bit like the southern bottlenose whale in the tropical Indian and Pacific Oceans. So there had been a number of sightings, but people didn't know what it was. And it looks very much like the southern bottlenose whale. So it got put down as query tropical bottlenose whale / southern bottlenose whale, not quite sure. And it wasn't until the specimen from South Africa with both the DNA and the photo of the fresh appearance that people realised really what the situation was. So it looks like southern bottlenose whale, very minor differences. So there had been some sightings in the tropical Indian, not Indian, Pacific Ocean.
Other questions for Charles? I'm just coming right back to you, madam. Hang on one moment.
You said that it was 17. You were there for 17 years before that whale washed up thing. What were you studying before that?
Okay. When I first went out, I joined the Ministry of Fisheries, and then they formed a Marine Research Centre, which I transferred to, and I worked for them for 15 years. So very important tuna fisheries in the Maldives. So a lot of work on tuna fisheries and bait for the tuna fishery. Also work on sharks, shark fisheries. I keep the national list of fishes of the Maldives, up to 1,200 species and still going. Too many things. Everything's interesting. The trouble is I have to focus rather, because everything's interesting. So mantas, birds, dragonflies, flatworms.
And he leads trips as well, don't you?
And I do, yes.
Other quick, I've got time for one more question, and I'm going to come round to you, the lady there. You notice my next speaker is now my tech assistant moving my wire for me.
Hi, I was just wondering, the beaked whales that you are seeing, is it a seasonal migration of them coming past the Maldives? Do you know, if they're migrating through, or are they there, generally year-round?
They appear to be there year-round, as far as I can tell. We see them in every month that we go out looking. There were 4 species that I'm aware of: Cuviers, which I started with, dense-beaked or Blainvilles, Longmans, and this Derenegallas. They're year-round. But in the Maldives, in the tropical Indian Ocean, it's a monsoon area, the currents shift. So twice a year, half a year they come this way and half the year they come that way. So twice a year things move from one side of the Maldives to the other. So including the beaked whales, they go from side to side of the Maldives, but as far as I can tell, they stay within Maldivian waters.
Thank you. Just want to say, Charles, not only is his sister here, his wife's here, and the message from his wife is, Charles is on stand 73, okay? So if you've got more questions, she says he won't say it himself, but this was such a brilliant talk, so can you please join me in thanking him again? Don't forget to give a rip where you want to score him on a little feedback form.